All right, we are live. Silver Doctors Live in the afternoon. My name is Mike, the co-host of Silver Doctors Live, along with my better half, Mr. Paul Half Dollar. How you doing, Paul?
Doing good, Mike. Thanks. A lot of interesting stuff going on again. Seems like the trade war never seems to die down, so there's a lot to jump into today.
Definitely. All right, so let's give it a second. Let's have a couple people chime in here. Let me pop up the chat so I can see, and I'll also join the chat on my end so I can make sure everything flows smoothly. But got a lot of things happening, and as always, for those that are watching, feel free to let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to acknowledge you, your presence with us this afternoon. So, and I got a couple articles I want to pull up here as well. So far we got about 9 or so people tuning in. So let's get started. Let's find out what's going on. So, Paul, the dollar. A lot of things happening in reference to the whole trade war situation. I'm not sure exactly how this will play out, but yet my gut feeling is that it will not be user-friendly for those that are solely dependent upon the Federal Reserve note as a current reserve currency, as well as we all know that it's not a real great store of value, but there's going to be some issues. So to start us off, share with us your thoughts on the whole weaponization of the Federal Reserve note.
Okay. Well, this has to do with the Treasury Department, right? So every year, the Treasury Department releases a report on major trading partners of the United States and what they're doing with their foreign currencies. Mm-hmm. So, maybe you've heard during the campaign or even recently, even just last July, I think I sent you an image where President Trump is talking about illegal currency manipulation, right? Mm-hmm. So, this report from the Treasury Department, which was just released yesterday, that didn't really get any much press coverage. Once again, the United States has failed to label China a currency manipulator, right? Yeah. And since the last report a year ago, not only are we not labeling China a currency manipulator, but President Trump, our own president, is saying they're doing illegal currency manipulation. Yeah. So I don't know if you can send that little image of the tweet that I took a screenshot of.
Give me one second.
But here's the thing about that, right? We talk about nuclear options, right? We were talking about, the Chinese talking about how they can sell treasury bonds, talking about how they can purchase additional gold, how they can just divert, bypass the dollar altogether. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that we have, right, that we can do is use the dollar as a weapon, right? We weaponize the dollar all over the place, right? Yeah. So kind of by not really labeling China as a currency manipulator, that's almost like, are we fighting a war or are we just pretending to fight a war? Because it's like, we used to sing in cadence when we were running. We used to be like, running through the desert with my M16 like a stupid MF where I forgot my magazine, right? And that's exactly what we're doing, right? We're trying to fight a trade war, but we didn't bring any weapons to fight it. Yeah. So if we're not going to label China as a currency manipulator, then what exactly are we going to be doing? Mm-hmm. Here's the thing about that, right? If China is a currency manipulator, what does that mean? That means that they're weakening their yuan, right? In retaliation to the tariffs, as a way to continue selling more into the United States, they can devalue their yuan against the dollar, and then that way it essentially negates the effect of the tariffs. Yeah. So by not labeling them a currency manipulator, we're basically saying, well, we kind of want things to stay the same because, Americans' consumption-based consumer economy can't really afford a stronger yuan because that means everything from China is going to go up anyway. Yeah. And if we're already collecting all these tariffs, right, then prices are already going up on top of that. So, my point here is that the Treasury Department is really stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? Because on the one hand, you've got a dollar that's relatively strong. It's been between 96 and 98 on the dollar index for the better part of a year now. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, you want China's value of their currency to increase against the dollar. Mm-hmm. But if you do that, that's going to squeeze the American consumer. Yeah. So there's just a lot of things going on behind the scene that when it comes to the dollar, what exactly are we trying to accomplish here? Because if we're talking about trade war nuclear options, if we're talking about, we're not going to negotiate with the Chinese, we're going to stick it to them, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Well, but on the other hand, if you're turning tail and running like a coward, then that's not really fighting a war, is it?
Yeah. Now, let me ask you a question. So we know that, so does this weaponization by the U.S. in reference to the currency manipulation aspect of the dollar, have anything to do with the hint at China dumping treasuries as a way of paying that tit for tat? Like, if you call us currency manipulators, we might end up having to dump your currency to protect and preserve our own whatever. So do you see that all being interconnected?
Yeah, it definitely can be. Just because, like we were talking about, it's like a technological arms race. It's also a trade war arms race. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, if they're threatening to dump the treasuries, and all this stuff is just happening in the last 2 weeks. Yeah. And, we've been talking about this for the last couple of weeks. But so just a week ago, they're saying, we've got all these treasuries we're going to dump. So what will we do? Instead of saying, oh, yeah, well, you know what? You're a currency manipulator. Go ahead and dump them because we're not going to take that anyway. Mm-hmm. But no, what do we do instead? We're like, oh, please don't dump your treasuries. And by the way, you're not a currency manipulator. We're sorry. Please send us your trinkets so we can buy stuff at Christmas time at Walmart. Yeah. That's what's going on here. Yeah. Right. So yes, it's a tit for tat, as you were saying, where, if China is threatening to strike against that, well, we should threaten to strike against them as a currency manipulator, but mm-hmm. we're not. So what's the bigger picture here? And secondly, this is the other thing that's frustrating, right? Because, this is the whole having your cake and eating it too, mm-hmm. because, not even, a year ago, President Trump was saying they're illegal currency manipulators. Mm-hmm. I mean, so which is it? Are they currency manipulators or are they not currency manipulators? It's like, it's like Baskin-Robbins flavor of the week. It's always changing, and it's just changing to fit the narrative. But the narrative is getting so twisted and warped right now that it's kind of hard to understand what's going on. Yeah. Here's what I think is going on. What's going on is this is setting the stage mm-hmm. for a weaker dollar. And this means that it's setting the stage for even higher inflation for us. Why is it setting the stage for a weaker dollar? I don't know if you remembered a couple weeks ago when you had a conversation about how I talked about how President Trump could manipulate the price of oil and then take credit for manipulating the price of oil. Right. So here's the thing about the Treasury Department, right? So the Treasury Department, they said, well, we're going to monitor the Chinese and what they're doing, mm-hmm. right? Like that's actually going to do something. But that's what status we have for China right now. They're on the monitoring list. That's an exact quote, and it's in quotes from the Treasury Department's website, where you have placed China on a monitoring list. Now, here's what I'm looking into that, right? By saying, and also saying they need to take progressive actions to change their behavior with their currency, mm-hmm. meaning they need their yuan to strengthen. Yeah. So here's what that means. By saying they need to take these actions, they're saying they want a stronger yuan, right? So what's going to happen is, magically the yuan is going to strengthen, and President Trump is going to take credit for that, just like he took credit for oil prices dropping, saying, I called the Saudis and I told them they better pump more oil. There's going to be serious consequences. The same thing is going to go on with the Chinese yuan. And they're going to be saying, I talked to Xi over there and, he didn't budge down, but I had my words with him, and we decided that he's not going to let his currency devalue anymore against the dollar. And we showed him. But here's the other thing about that, right? Yeah. What he's not saying is that with a strengthening yuan, which he's going to take credit for, the flip side of that is a weakening dollar, mm-hmm. right? Is he going to take credit for that? No, he's not even going to acknowledge the weakening dollar part of it, right? Yeah. But that's the flip side of that. A strengthening yuan is a weakening dollar.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm looking at, I just put up an article just to find out what the exchange ratio was. And I know I saw as of last week it was above 7. It was 7-1. And there was a lot of concerns about this manipulation talk. So now it looks like it's weakened a little bit, but below $7 or 7 yuan to $1. And so ultimately, I would imagine, and we're just talking about currency in relation to this trade situation. We're not talking about, the issues that's happening inside China, because I personally, apart from hearing a little bit from other commentators, have never really dived deep into it. But other than realizing last week in China, the People's Bank of China took over a failing bank there, and so they're actually having some default situations with their banking sector, which kind of tells me that there's a lot of issues inside China outside of this whole currency situation, nevertheless of the things we have here. So I think this tit for tat, currency war, as Jane Rickards, wrote a book about, is probably going to become evident more so inside China. We won't hear about it, but it's going to start hitting the surface here, perhaps this summer, whether it be the inflation aspect, as you mentioned, because I noticed personally the prices of gas, especially here in Michigan, Detroit area, is $3 a gallon, and I was recently in Chicago, it was $3.50. So I think by June, July, we're going to start seeing the gas prices go up, as well as other goods and services. So inflation, let's talk about that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Price of goods and services going up, which is a sign of a weakening currency, of which Trump won't take credit for that. So I foresee this summer him going on a tweet storm marathon about the Federal Reserve needing to probably cut rates this mid-summer time frame like never before. Will they do it will be the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And we can talk about the inverted yield curve too, which is blowing up as of yesterday, to add on to that. But before I forget this thought, because you make a great point about gas prices, and I actually just wrote about this morning, which is interesting. And last week we were talking about how Ford had shifted focus to large SUVs and their F-150s, right? Yeah. Exactly the wrong time.
Yeah.
Here's what people don't realize, right? Gas has come down big time in the last couple of weeks. I think it was April 26th when Trump sent out that tweet saying, I just talked to the Saudis and I told them they better pump or else.
Yeah.
But here's the thing about gas prices, right? In 2014, the price for a barrel of crude oil was over $107 in June of 2014.
Yeah.
In December, the final week in December of 2014, the crude oil price was $52. Right. So you're talking about the crude oil price absolutely crashed 50% in less than 6 full months. Right. Yeah. So when my point with that is when this turns, and I think it will turn, because I think that is the plan to bring economic pain and suffering to the United States. But when this turns, those gas prices can go up just as fast as they came down. And I think it's going to be shocking because right now, if you look at crude oil chart on a daily basis, that chart looks horrible.
Yeah.
Right? It looks like it's headed for another leg down.
Yeah.
But, really, this but I don't think that the chart really matters if we're talking about all of these blatant direct manipulations that are just excessive to the extremes right now. So I think that it's going to turn and that those gas prices are really going to start moving here. I thought it was going to be spring. My timing was off. I probably make 100 predictions a year and I probably get 101 predictions wrong a year. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's going to turn, and I think that's a good point you make. Are people remembering what it's like to pay $5 to $6 a gallon for gas? And on top of that, did they have a large Ford Excursion or a Ford Explorer, or did they have one of those Ford Fiestas? Do they even make the Ford Fiesta anymore? I don't know, but it's going to be a lot of pain at the pump.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Now, watch this. Not to cut you off, but I mentioned in the beginning about acknowledging people, but yet forgot to check the live stream portion. So let's acknowledge a couple people that's tuning in and find out if there's any questions. As always, in reference to anything we're talking about or whatever else might be relevant to the subject matter, feel free to ask us in the chat, and we'll definitely try to make sure we acknowledge your presence as well as your questions. So just to give a couple acknowledgments, we got says Boo Boo Jones. It says, will the dollar be weaponized by the U.S.? Is a question mark. It says, why is gold and silver not rising when market falls deeply? And so that seems like a pretty interesting question, Mr. Half Dollar. Why is gold and silver not rising?
Because they're just naked shorting the snot out of it with paper. That's why. Because, they're selling paper gold and paper silver that doesn't exist to cover the increasing demand. So, we're seeing that we're having explosions in open interest, right? Which means that people are buying up, right? But they're just feeding paper in the market to keep the price down.
Yeah.
That's why it's not rising. And on top of that, you see that it would be because when we look at things like the cryptos that are running, right, and that they are allowing to run at this point. But I mean, it's really that simple. When you have a printing press and you have time on your side, and as a trader, right, if I'm a trader and I don't have a printing press, I don't have time on my side. So, I can buy as many contracts as I want, but if they keep selling as many contracts as they want, which they do, to ultimately run down the price, then I can't wait that out because I don't have unlimited money. There was another thing about the dollar being weaponized. Hasn't it already been weaponized? Yes and no, right? I can't remember what that question was, but yes and no, right? It's selectively weaponized, right? We want to weaponize it against Iran. We want to weaponize it against Venezuela. We want to weaponize it against Russia, right? To an extent, we want to weaponize it against China, But on the other hand, China's our largest creditor nation.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, some of us, our trade relies on China, that it's like, well, we're going to turn a blind eye to China because we really can't afford to weaponize it against them.
Yeah. Now watch this. Even in defining weaponizing, how exactly what is there an official definition for weaponizing a currency? Because I'm thinking about the payment systems itself that's utilized for that currency being the most dangerous weapons or whatsoever, because it has to do with the SWIFT system. And so for all those sanctions out there, so I would probably put sanctions as a way of weaponizing a currency, because in order to do business internationally, you have to go through the SWIFT system, which has become the primary tool to weaponize the currency. So sanctions have been going up, and everybody, if you're not a currency manipulator, you're already under sanctions. So that's the best way to disrupt an economy. And so just look at the side effects of sanctions in reference to nations that aren't playing ball with us or doing what we're telling them to do, such as Iran, Venezuela. I think Turkey might be under some sanctions. I think India was on a currency watch list or something. But, I got to find this out. But how many countries are actually under sanctions by the U.S.? Because those economies are the ones that are having the most difficulty. Therefore, their currencies are in trouble. So
yeah, and it's not just countries, right? It's in the thousands, because it's countries, it's state-owned entities, it gets down to businesses, and it gets down to, like, the Treasury Department will name specific people that they actually sanction from certain countries.
Yeah.
So it's well beyond that. And you're exactly right? The SWIFT system is the primary tool, because basically you're cutting the person off, right? So by weaponizing the dollar, you're saying, well, we're just not going to let you do any international trade because we're going to cut you off from the system, right? And that's why we see, like, Russia and China co-developing alternatives to the SWIFT system.
Now, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish your thought. I was trying to look up lists for sanctions, whatever, but nothing popped up right away. But think about this: if our government, the Treasury, is sanctioning nations based upon their cooperation or not in keeping the current paradigm underway, imagine this whole de-dollarization process that other nations are doing by diversifying away from Federal Reserve notes could end up looking like sanctions on the American people, ultimately, in regards to how we utilize the Federal Reserve note as our livelihood, as our very lifeblood of our economy. And so the de-dollarization is the world's way of sanctioning us, that we don't really see it that way. But I think we're going to end up experiencing some difficulties the way we're causing problems for other nations. Wouldn't you agree?
I think you're right. And I was also talking about this earlier today when I wrote my midweek update, is that, if we think about it as individuals, right, it's human nature to manipulate currency, right? Like, if I wait for something to go on sale, right, if I'm waiting for ground beef to go on sale for $2.99 a pound, then I'm manipulating my purchasing power by manipulating my currency by waiting for the price to decrease. If I transfer a balance from one credit card with a higher interest rate to a lower interest rate, I'm manipulating currency. If I'm haggling a price, for something at a yard sale, I'm manipulating currency. So just as individuals, that's what we do. We always try and maximize the currency that we hold, right? I mean, that's just what we want to do. Yeah. So as a country, it makes sense that any country would seek to use its own currency to its advantage, however they can, right? Yeah. I mean, that's just economics. Yeah. So here's the thing, right? So why would any country not be manipulating their currency? It's only natural that you would. Yeah. But here's the thing about, like, weaponizing the dollar. Other nations are just getting sick of it. So when you're talking about it's going to come back to us, yes, you're right. And part of that is because the de-dollarization just builds on the fact that nations are tired of this. They don't want to keep being bullied. So like yesterday with the Treasury Department report, so that could be seen as backing down a little bit, but interestingly, nobody's talking about that, right? I mean, it barely got any news at all. Yeah. But, the bottom line is, if you push too far with that weaponization, then it's just going to be, I've reached the point where I'm no longer afraid of the change that's unknown, and I'm willing to embrace it. And what does that change? That's a world that moves on from the U.S. dollar as world reserve currency.
Yeah. And so in speaking with the prior interview I did yesterday with Leor Gantz about his thoughts on the dollar no longer being a reserve currency down the line, it kind of seems like it's an inevitable process, just because every nation or empire, the United States of America, our role as the leading currency of the world comes to an end. It's more so a matter of how does it come to an end? Is it a slow, or is this a rapid? And I think I'm noticing a rapid increase in nations deciding to just basically, look for alternatives. And it appears that we're playing into it with the sanctions, forces nations to have to go out and do business without us, and force other nations to come up with their own payment systems. Then we have the alternative means, and then we have Russia and China accumulating massive amounts of gold like they've never done before. All that spells troubles for the Federal Reserve note, aka the dollar, anyway. So it's just a matter of how much longer do we have to where we really begin to feel the effects of a currency that's solely needed for us here as U.S. citizens. So.
Yes, yeah. and I think that it is going to be a lot faster than people realize, because remember, all we're doing is we're talking about that last 3% of value that's left in the dollar.
Yeah.
And once people realize that they're playing a game of hot potato, see, right now only the smart people realize it, right? So only smart nations and smart people are de-dollarizing.
Yeah.
The rest of the world hasn't caught on because they don't want this message getting out, right?
Yeah.
But once that message gets out and people really start seeing what's going on the street level, then that's when it really picks up speed. It's funny too, because I give out these little examples just here and there. One-offs is hyperinflation. And I don't know if you remember, we were talking a couple weeks ago about how Bloomberg sells this program called Bloomberg Terminal, which traders tap into, and it's very expensive.
Yeah.
Well, the LBMA has started this new transparency reporting for the gold and silver markets, right?
Mm-hmm.
With like how much gold is being sold and moved through and all this and all that. And they're charging $18,000 a year just to access that data, to have access to those reports. And right away, like the disclaimer on that says, we don't guarantee the accuracy of anything in this report, yet they're charging $18,000 to see the daily movements of gold and silver on the LBMA.
Yeah.
So it's like, how many more examples do we need? People keep talking about there's no inflation. It is all around us, right? And yes, it's not just in the financial markets. That's what everybody likes to say. Well, it's only really in housing prices or the stocks or this or that. I mean, it's everywhere. But it's just that when we talk about in the financial markets, that's where it's the most absurd, right? Yeah. Where if I wanted to see the LBMA's daily transparency data, I'd have to pay $18,000 a year to see it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, good stuff, man. Let's get to the chat a little bit. So, what type of questions do we have out there? Let's open it up a little bit and find out if there's any questions that people might have in reference to what we're talking about, or anything else that they might want to touch on. And so, I see some people gave some gas prices when we're talking about prices around the country. And think about this: and a lot of people in the U.S. who haven't had a chance to travel outside the country, we're the only ones that utilize the gas, the gallon. And so we have everyone else outside the country using liters. And so I would imagine, especially in European area, in South America, you're paying 3, 4, whatever the currency is for that particular liter. So gas prices I'm assuming are a lot higher in other countries, given the fact you need 4.4 liters in a gallon or something like that. So yeah, could you imagine spending close to 8 or 9 euros or whatever for a single gallon? It's relative speaking.
This is why I don't think the next major move in the dollar is going to be up. This is why I think it's going to be down, because the rest of the world is struggling. And your point about gas prices brings that point home. Mm-hmm. Take Mexico, for example, right? Mm-hmm. Gasoline in Mexico costs more than it does in the United States, right?
Yeah.
So dollar for dollar.
Yeah.
So as a Mexican, you're not earning dollars, right?
Yeah.
You're earning pesos,
yeah.
But you're paying more at a dollar price level for your gasoline than Americans are paying. I mean, the rest of the world just cannot handle the dollar where it is right now.
Yeah.
Let alone see it strengthen from here. So it's going to be a double benefit for the rest of the world, because they won't have to pay as much for gasoline, and they won't have to pay as much for anything else dollar related as the dollar loses value.
Yeah. But
it's going to be that same double whammy for us here in the United States, where not only is everything else costing more, but also prices at the pump are going up.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, so I'm waiting on a chart to pop up here about national gas prices. But I actually want to get to some questions or some thoughts, because once again, it doesn't take much for a thought to pop up in our mind, and then we'll take the conversation somewhere else.
Yeah,
and,
that's a good thought by Mateo. Don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Yes, that's exactly right. And not only is the United States not bringing a knife to a gunfight. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not even showing up to the fight. We just got scared with that Treasury report yesterday.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, come on. And it's funny because last week, everybody, and even in the alternative media, everybody's like talking so tough. You know, China, you want this trade war? Bring it on. We're going to stick it to you. We're going to destroy your economy. But then just yesterday, if you like actually look at the reports, it's like, well, we would appreciate it if you weren't so, so weak with your currency there, Mr. Z. Which is it, right?
Yeah, man. Someone mentioned here, I saw something about the job situation here. And so it was a question about jobs. But to speak further on that, about current job situation, and then we're getting more and more numbers about layoffs and slowdown and things of that nature. Do you think by, say, this, the upcoming election period, we're going to have a lot more news about companies needing to lay off, which could hinder this whole narrative of an expansion, because they're still using that still in the midst of calling for cuts? How bad do you think this whole job situation is going to get, especially if this trade war continues on? Because I'm not sure how this can be resolved at all, but I foresee it getting worse. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do see it getting worse. And just yesterday, we briefly hit on the inverted yield curve, mm-hmm. right? But now, right, the Fed funds rate, which is like the ultra short-term overnight rate for interest, right, mm-hmm. for the price of money, right? That rate is actually higher than the yield on the 10-year note, mm-hmm. right? So think about this. You can loan money overnight and get more return on that money than you can loaning the United States government money for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Now, what that means is people are valuing the here and the now. What that also means is people aren't planning out for the future. How does that relate to the jobs, and how does that relate to the upcoming recession? Yeah. Well, whenever the yield curve inverts like that and money becomes, and you get more yield in the short term than you do in the long term, yeah. well, then you're saying that liquidity is drying up, right? People aren't willing to invest for the long term. They're only willing to invest for the short term. Yeah. And what that means is that the outlook decreases significantly, which means that, all of this record unemployment and all of this great job growth, all of that stuff has already happened. Mm-hmm. And when the economy turns, that's when it's really going to start picking up. Yeah. And my theory all along has been that President Trump's going to be the fall guy for this when it goes down. So I do think the massive job losses are coming, and that we're only seeing a taste of it. I think there was an article yesterday talking about industry-wide, they're looking at the whole auto industry sales year over year have actually declined year over year. And that's like the first time it's happened in how many years. And then on top of that, we hear about Ford, but Ford's not the only company that's laying off. You're talking about pretty much all the major automotive manufacturers around the world are facing some sort of crisis right now with the declining auto sales. Yeah. So the yield curve is telling you that a recession is coming, and this one's going to be particularly nasty because it's also coming up on an election cycle.
Yeah. Now, so even with that particular indicator that has been used forever to kind of predict a recession, I've been looking at this for quite some time now, and there's other people who use other metrics that have already flashed red. So the signals have been flashing red for quite a while now. And apart from the numbers we're given about GDP, I think, like always, after the second quarter, when they look back and make the adjustments, they're going to find out that this 3.2 GDP growth, whatever, is very fraudulent and will be downgraded significantly. So I've seen people mention that we're at 1% or around that ballpark as far as our actual gross domestic product. But once again, I question that because, to my knowledge, the GDP is based upon a lot of government consumption. And so we're running deficits rather. So we're borrowing. So there is no way out of this mess that's in the works. So, yeah, man.
Yeah, and if you think about stuff like, interest rates, GDP, the rate of inflation, mm-hmm. All of these things is, I think an interesting thing that people don't understand is, when we're talking about 2%, that's the magic number that gets thrown out there. But if you have prices rise by 2% per year, mm-hmm. which is what the Fed is publicly stating, even though it's not one of their, chartered objectives, or I can't remember the word that they use for it, mandates, that's what they use. A 2% inflation objective isn't a mandate. The mandate is stable prices. Yeah. But at 2%, I think it's I'm terrible at the math, but basically you're saying that every year you want your dollar to buy 2% less.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about it in terms of like gold and silver, every year you want the price of gold and silver to go up by 2%. So there's like a 4% spread just on that. And if you're talking about like, you know, GDP being so low, well, why are they saying it's so low? Because they're trying to keep these easy policies because they need to stimulate this growth because they're saying they haven't reached their 2% target yet. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that it is in the best interest to even present lower GDP numbers because of all the cries for, you know, cutting interest rates, going back to quantitative easing and things like that.
Yeah.
I just ran around in circles with like 3 different topics.
No, that's all fine and good. That's all fine and good because it ultimately boils down to we know that the only way to keep this thing going is to continue on with the policies that's been implemented. And so by the Great Recession having started this easing, they can only continue it on. Like there's no backtracking to what was once normal of having 4 or 5% interest rates where it was actually a normal market. The new normal is abnormal. So with that being the case, we know that things can only get worse because this is all, once again, my opinion, all an experiment towards the very end of which they're reacting to situations out here in the world, not proactively being able to guide and steer this markets anymore. So I think it's just a matter of keeping this thing together as long as they can, which lets me know that, you know, currencies will fluctuate, markets will be volatile. Only thing remains constant and stable is your weight, is your metals in a sense. So yeah, more importance to you know take advantage of these prices while we still have them.
And that's exactly right. And especially while the dollar is still strong, right? And while
you still can buy something of substance with it.
Yes, and you can buy silver for $2 an ounce cheaper than it costs to actually mine it. So not only that, but you can get real money for those dollars.
Yeah. Silver at $15 is perfect right now. Let it be. So we got Steven, we got Mateo, we got Michael. Love the discussion. Appreciate you, Michael. We got Jen. Glenn here says might have some time fun. Physical precious metals are essential for when the phony house of cards collapses. Very true, very true. Now, so let me ask you a question, and this is just and also chime in the chat. This is about a matter of preference. So, what do you personally prefer? Do you prefer government minted coins, and do you think about the legal tender aspect of it? And so, a lot of people reference, having a U.S. minted coin because it can be considered legal tender down the line one day. It can't be confiscated, all that stuff like that. Or do you prefer a generic round or another government issue coin? What's your personal preference, as well as those watching? Are there any preferences, and why? And why is that?
My preference, I really like 90% a lot. And let me tell you why I like 90% a lot. 90% is one of those leading indicators in the gold and silver market, right? And I'm talking about the physical market here. When the U.S. Mint ran out of Silver Eagles, I think it was the first half of 2016, if I'm not mistaken. But silver was flying off the shelves during that year. And one of the things we saw was that it might have been at the end of 2015, but one of the things we saw was that the premium on 90%, right? Like right now you can get it dirt cheap. But whenever the silver market starts drying up, right, so to say, this is just a couple years ago, I remember seeing premiums in excess of $6 on 90%, right? So my point there is that, if you look at something like 90%, right now you can get it, at a cheap price because nobody cares about silver. But once people start caring about silver again, and they will, the premium on 90% is going to go through the roof because there's a finite supply of 90%, right? There's only so much of it around. So in order to get that 90% to the market, you've got to entice somebody to actually sell it, right? And the only way you can do that is to increase the premium on it. I call it premium creep, right? So premium creep. I think we're at this point right now where, it's about as low as it's going to get in relation to the premiums. Because let's say somebody is wanting to hold off for silver to drop down to 14 or drop down to 13.50. Well, what's going to happen to the actual physical supply if that happens? What's going to happen is, they're going to fly through all the Eagles that they've been able to stock up on, and then all of a sudden premiums on Eagles are going to go through the roof, or premiums on 90% are going to go through the roof. So, let's use 90% as an example. If you're trying to buy silver at $14 and you're holding off for it, and it's dropping down and it's like 14.10, then it finally breaks 14 to like 13.98 or something, but all of a sudden 90% vanishes from the marketplace, you're going to end up paying more than you would have right now because the premium on it has gone up so much. Because remember, there's two prices when it comes to gold and silver. There's the spot price and then there's the premium, right? Because the spot price is one thing, but what you actually pay to get that coin in your hand, right, that's something else. Right. That's why I like 90%, because not only does it have the appreciation, not only is it constitutional money, but it's also something that it can increase in value based on the spot price, and it can increase in value based on the premium. So it's like a double win.
Yeah, that's good stuff, man. Good stuff. I've learned something there. So me personally, I'm more of the like, I'll just take it however I can get it. I just like playing. I just appreciate these prices. So I don't really have a preference myself. So a lot of people ask that question out of curiosity. So thought I would throw it out there. And so
yeah, I think that way too, right? So, you know, we talk about diversifying, and it's like I diversify my silver holdings, right? So, you know, I love 90%, right? I like 90% a lot, but also like generic rounds because you can get your weight up with that. Also like the government minted coins because, well, I mean, the silver eagles, right? So what's not to like about those? So yeah, it is a game of ounces at the very end of it, especially when we're talking about, you know, once the market turns and the cartel loses control of the market, I mean, whatever you have at that point is going to, you know, you're going to reap the rewards of no matter what kind of silver it is at that point.
Right. It always boils down to possession over price at this current point. How many ounces or how many, whatever your preferred measurement of weight is, because you got people out there in the kilograms, and we got some people out probably watching have a little tonnage, so or whatever you fit in at. But we got gold, silver eagles because they are well recognized from mica. Low blood pressure says eagles, Krugerrands, Philharmonics, no maples or queen face silver. And someone says hold a 100-ounce silver bar. You will never look back. So Mateo says hold 100 ounces. And then somebody replies about how do you make change?
Yeah, that's the hard part, right? You don't let it. You spray paint it black and use it as a doorstop or something like that. you don't let anybody know about that. You know, and you get a really sharp knife to be able to sliver it off. But here's the thing, right? I can't remember who I heard this from, but on a recent interview, and the point is valid, right? Like you can take dollars, right, around the world, and not every country is going to accept dollars. You know, believe it or not, people want you to change your dollars into the local currency, right? But if you take gold eagles or silver eagles around the world, it doesn't matter where you are. You can instantly convert those gold eagles or silver eagles into the local currency more than you can convert the dollars into the local currency. So, you know, that's another reason why the government coins can have that, you know, that's another reason why there's also that premium attached to them as well, because of that, because they're recognized, because they're authenticated, because they're backed, so to say, by the governments. But, you know, when you compare the dollar to a gold eagle or a silver eagle, it's actually the gold eagle or the silver eagle that's more liquid than the dollar.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, as we draw towards the end, we've been almost 40 minutes. I want to talk about the ratio because someone brought it to my attention, I think it was yesterday, that it's close to 90, if not 90. I'm not sure what it is. But what are your thoughts on the ratio? Like, are you of the mindset, a lot of people say that, you know, buy silver because it's extremely cheap. And then as the ratio corrects, they'll then, you know, sell some to buy gold. And I think that was one of Mike Maloney's type of approaches there. What are your thoughts on that? Like buying a lot of silver now or more than enough now and then converting it to gold and wait for the price to skyrocket because, you know, silver to people's money goes to the money of bankers and governments and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, it's called the gold to silver ratio arbitrage. Well, that's what I call it. I don't know the exact words, but yeah, and it makes total sense, right? Because you can't think of it in dollars. You have to think of it in gold and silver, right? So right now, if you want to buy an ounce of gold, you have to pay 90 ounces of silver, right? But down the line, you know, if the ratio turns to more historical norms, right? Let's say the ratio goes to 45. Well, what does that mean? That means that today, you have to have 90 ounces to buy 1 ounce of gold, 90 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. But if the ratio goes down to 45, that means for that same 90 ounces, you can get 2 ounces of gold, right? So the gold to silver ratio, it really is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, right? Well, not in a lifetime. It's a once-in-a-cycle opportunity, right? So
I like that.
We're at the extreme at the cycle. What are the norms, right? Well, the norms, people are going to throw out 50 as a norm. Mm-hmm. In the United States, the norm was 16, mm-hmm. right? So when we're talking about the Coinage Act 1792, we're talking about a ratio that was established of 16 to 1.
Yeah.
You know, Keith Neumeyer, right, CEO of First Majestic Silver, mm-hmm. talks about silver being pulled out of the ground as a ratio of 9 to 1, right? I personally, some people don't buy into the fact that silver can go to parity mm-hmm. with gold. I do, right? It's a precious metal. It's one of only 4 precious metals. Furthermore, people say, you know, well, you can't go back to a gold standard because there's not enough gold. Well, my reply to that would be, A, it's a bimetallic gold and silver standard if you're going by the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And B, right, just because there's not enough gold, it's a question of price. And if it comes down to there's not enough just period, well, then if silver's at parity with gold because we're talking about a reset, then there's plenty of it to go around at that point. Yeah. So, yes, I think the gold to silver ratio is very important for everybody to understand because we're at that point where it's going to turn, right? So, you know, it takes 90 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. And just a couple of years ago, it was in the 60s, mm-hmm. right? So you're already talking about you could get, you know, a third of that in gold. Yeah. As far as how the math works out. I'm a terrible mathematician, but you see my point there, right? Yeah. You know, before a couple years ago, it was in the 60s. Now it's in the 90s. You know, if it gets down to the 50s, it gets down to 45. Basically, you can get twice the amount of gold that you can today. So,
yeah, mm-hmm. Good stuff, man. Good stuff. So we got 10 to 1, just some odds out there. We got 30 to 1 at least, 32 to 1. So a lot of people, everyone appears to realize that the 90 to 1 is not normal and it's not natural and it's not sustainable. So we'll see how much longer. But yeah, once again, possession over price any time of the day. And so what else? So Rob, so Paul, I think we kind of covered.
Hold on, I gotta jump in. I gotta jump.
Go ahead.
Stephen or Stefan, I'm not sure how he's going to pronounce his name, but he says, "Why no maples?" And you know, I take a lot of heat for this, right? Yeah. A lot of heat, but you know, I think the Queen of England already has enough influence as it is. You know what I mean? So, you know, I've been to Canada plenty of times. I got nothing against Canada. I got nothing against, you know, the Perth Mint. But personally, me, why no maples? Because I don't want the Queen on the back of that coin that I'm holding. Yeah. You know? And that might be why Canadian maple leaves are discounted to an American Silver Eagle, because the only way to sell them is you got to offer them cheaper because it's got the Queen on the back. I don't know. Probably going to take a whole lot of heat for that. Yeah. But, you know, that's my personal opinion, and I can't, you know, I got to put it out there, right?
Yeah. So somebody said, I would support the gangsters at the US and CA mints when they're on sale. Yeah, so yeah, I say like, if they're on sale, I don't have a problem who's on the coin.
Philharmonics, I love Phil's. I love Libertads. That's why I like those, right? Because they're unique. And that's the other thing, right? The Queen is not on the reverse of the coin. Mm-hmm. The Queen is on the obverse of the coin, right? People don't understand that. She's not on the back. She's on the front. You know what I mean?
He said I can burn her face and tongue. Oh, man, people can get men out there. So, hey, everybody, it's been great. We've been over 40 minutes, and so, you know, great stream today. I definitely enjoyed it, Paul. $50. Any last thoughts you want to leave us all with, as well as anybody out there want to chime in with the last minute thought that we can share before we sign off for this week live stream? Anything, Paul?
Yes, I do have one thing. Over the weekend, Lindsey Graham, right, said, you know, President Trump, please do the right thing and go invade Venezuela, right? Here's the thing, right? And this drives me crazy because this just shows that we're still not there yet, right? Yeah. I don't know if you remember back during the Brett Kavanaugh, right, Supreme Court confirmation hearings, right? The alternative media just jumped on it. They're like, oh, look at this. Lindsey Graham is, you know, asking, you know, Brett Kavanaugh about military tribunals, and this is great. This Lindsey Graham's a patriot now, and there's going to be all these mass arrests, and we're going to bring all these traitors to justice. Yeah. But what does he do over the weekend, right? He's saying, you know, Mr. Trump, we got to overthrow the government of Venezuela and militarily invade them and effect regime change. My point there is, once you're deep state, you're always deep state, right? So, you know, let's not lose sight of the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that, you know, maybe somebody will throw out a bone here or there, but really at the bottom, evil is evil, right? Yeah. That was my closing thoughts there.
Yeah, fair enough. Hey, man, that's good stuff. I wasn't aware of that, so definitely. And so I haven't, unfortunately, heard much about Venezuela other than it looks like they're looking to have a little bit of mediary type of talks in Norway between the opposition and the president. So if they're talking over in Norway, if that is official, I wonder what they're talking about. And is that sanctioned by the United States government? Because I don't know if they're wanting them to collaborate and work together. They want complete disruption. So we'll see how that turns out. But I'm sure by this summer we'll find out more in reference to what's happening down in Venezuela. But other than that, everybody's been great hanging out this afternoon. Thanks for tuning in. More importantly, if you have enjoyed the back and forth, don't be afraid to donate a thumbs up right beneath this video here somewhere. Click the thumbs up button and just show your support for the channel. If you found this informative, feel free to share it with family, friends, so they're going to be aware of what's going on. And more importantly, come back next week, same time, same place, and join the chat and invite a friend. Bring a friend with you. So other than that, everybody be blessed, be safe, have a good week, and we'll see you guys later. Peace.